Welcome. In this short video, we're going to introduce modern portfolio theory. Modern portfolio theory, as it's known today, was introduced by Harry Markowitz in a paper dating back to 1952. For his work, Markowitz was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1990. But to get a true feeling of its significance, we will rewind time back more than 3,000 years to around 1750 BC in the Babylonian Empire ruled by King Hammurabi. Hammurabi had a deep interest in law and justice. During his reign, he commissioned a 7-foot-tall basalt seal called the Code of Hammurabi. The seal contained a large number of laws or codes for life under his reign. Several laws dealt directly with interest payments. For example, Code 88 set the maximum interest rate for grains and silver, while Code 92 specified punishment for overcharging interest rates. So what's my point here? Simply that rates of return for interest rates have been understood for thousands of years. It's not a modern concept. In the context of this course, we'll call the rate of return or the return a metric or a measure. It happens to be non-dimensional and it's easy to understand. The next metric used in modern portfolio theory has been quite elusive for thousands of years. The metric deals with risk. For thousands of years, humans have been well aware of risk. What we did not have is an actual way of measuring risk. There has been no metric for risk in the same way as return. That is, until the introduction of modern portfolio theory by Harry Markowitz. So up to that point in history, how was risk handled? Was there a universal definitive metric for risk? Previous to modern portfolio theory, it seems that risk was treated as a rule of thumb with no definitive metric. If we go all the way back to around 900 BC, we'll see a verse in the NLT version of Ecclesiastes that says, quote, "To divide your investment among many places, but you do not know what the risk may lie ahead." Quote. Verses that follow seem to describe a variety of natural risk scenarios or disasters that can befall humanity. A more recent phrase used today is, quote, "Don't put all your eggs in one basket." Quote. The phrase just might have originated in a Spanish and English translation of the book Don Quixote, written in the early 1600s. The phrase seems to focus on controlling risk in a portfolio. This eggs in a basket phrase can be used to explore risk in detail. Let's examine a possible scenario. Let's say you split your eggs into 5 baskets. Now all the baskets are placed on one cart. The cart rolls down the hill, crashes into the street, and breaks all the baskets with all the eggs inside. This is a strange analogy. Let me explain with a concrete example. Everyone remembers the 2008 crash. During and after this crash, General Motors became a highly distressed company. I know several people who worked for a small manufacturing firm that supplied subparts for all the radiators in the GM trucks. As it turns out, this company disappeared for obvious reasons. So these two baskets, or companies, were on the same cart. One crashing down the hill took the other one with it. So at this point, we can stop and make a few generalized comments about risk of a portfolio. The first one would be, putting more investments in the portfolio tends to reduce risk. The second generalized comment is, there are some types of connections between securities and portfolio that can affect risk. We can use the phrase baskets on the same cart to go along with the phrase eggs in one basket. So it stands to reason that any risk metric used in a portfolio theory should address these two common sense observations in this way. 1. The overall portfolio risk metric used should decrease as the number of assets are increased. Number 2, the portfolio risk metric should self-identify and adjust to the assets that follow the baskets in the same cart behavior. That is, adding more assets that are essentially in the same cart, the portfolio risk might not decrease that much if any. In short, if you're able to get a risk metric and include more investments in your portfolio, the risk in the portfolio should decrease slightly as long as the investments in your portfolio are not coupled together by riding on the same cart down the hill. As it turns out, the risk metric used in modern portfolio theory handles both of these common sense observations. Two investments that are riding on the same cart down the hill can be observed by looking at the numerical correlation between those investments. For example, if two investments are highly correlated, they're going to ride down the hill together, meaning if one goes down the hill, the other will go down the hill with it. Two investments that are not correlated generally act independently of each other, and therefore are not riding on the same cart going down the hill. In addition, if two investments are negatively correlated, one will be going uphill on one cart while the other goes downhill on another cart. This negative correlation situation can reduce the risk of a portfolio. What we'll find as we go through this course is the more investments in a portfolio, the risk tends to drop below the risk of any individual security in the portfolio. So in review, Harry Markowitz's modern portfolio theory was highly significant due to the use of a concrete risk metric. Using this risk metric, and including more securities in a portfolio, reduces the overall risk in the portfolio, something that makes common sense. The portfolio theory also deals with correlated and uncorrelated securities, meaning it can identify which securities are highly correlated with each other and which ones are not. The portfolio theory will adjust the holdings of these correlated and uncorrelated securities in such a way as to obtain the lowest risk for a given return, or the portfolio can be constructed to give the largest return for a given risk. There's something I should say before we go any further. Many people use modern portfolio theory and diversification in the same sense. They often imply that using modern portfolio theory will guarantee diversification. However, diversification is not guaranteed in modern portfolio theory. What we'll show later in this course is that often finding the maximum return for a given risk involves giving up diversification. One would think that using modern portfolio theory would always guarantee a high level of diversification. However, as we'll see later, an unconstrained use of modern portfolio theory can be problematic if we wish to ensure a diversified portfolio. In other words, we will not use statements like modern portfolio theory will always give this or that. Our goal in this course is to give everyone the tools necessary to carry out their own investigations and to make their own conclusions about their situations. Finance is much like life. It's very messy and somewhat subjective. There are very powerful and concrete tools that can help us clean up the messy world of finance and to make sense of it all. Modern portfolio theory is an incredibly powerful tool that can be used to clean up the messy world of constructing financial portfolios. Okay, in this video, we're going to look at how to develop a working knowledge of modern portfolio theory. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to look at the mathematical structure of modern portfolio theory. We're going to investigate a historical return series, and we're going to calculate the mean and standard deviation of that return series. And we're going to calculate the correlations of two assets. So we're going to create a historical return series of two assets. We're going to construct the portfolio returns from the asset returns using the mathematics. And we're going to adjust asset holdings to understand the portfolio risk and returns. Now in this video, we're going to do all this in an Excel spreadsheet, which will be made available on the website. Okay, let's start this second lecture by going to the Wikipedia page. With it, there's a description of the modern portfolio theory. I'll leave that up to you to go through. We're going to focus on a set of equations here, 3 in fact. But we're also going to commit this plot to memory. This is a plot of the standard deviation on the x-axis, which is considered to be the risk, which is the part that Markowitz came up with. We have the expected return on the y-axis, and we have our asset points placed on the plot, and what is labeled the efficient frontier. This will become apparent to us soon. And then we have basically a tangent portfolio. This was generated, the concepts were generated from Sharpe, William Sharpe, which he received the Nobel Prize in the same year that Markowitz did for this. Let's look at our 3 equations that we are most interested in. One of which is sitting right here. The sum of all the weights is equal to 1. The other of which is the expected return of the portfolio is the sum of the weights times the expected return of each individual component. But the portfolio variance, or return variance, is where the risk comes from. In fact, the sigma is the standard deviation, the sigma squared is the variance, and this is the equation that's universal right here. So let's go and take a look at those. So we see our 3 equations dispersed on the page up on the right here. We see that the sum of all the weights have to equal to 1. We see that the expected return of a portfolio is the sum of the returns of the individual assets in the portfolio times the weight of the percentage being held. This is the key here. The risk, which in fact is the square root of this, is a double sum of various terms here. These terms, we'll look at them, focus on them real quick here, and what we see, these are the asset weights. If like the weight of 1 is 50%, that should be 0.5. So the sum of all these weights together should equal to 100. So we might have 50% here, 0.5 times 0.2, if we, whatever the weight is in that portfolio. These are the standard deviation, or the risk of each of those assets. And this term is the correlation between individual assets. So let's take a look at an Excel spreadsheet that I made here with an entry that we can focus in on these three terms here. we've placed it in this exact Excel spreadsheet is placed in the learning management system, so you can just download this. But let's take a look at this for a moment. So let's be very precise about what's happening here. This is the time. I could just as easily put January, February, March, but I just decided to put numbers. This is the actual return during that period. It made 3% the first month, so you can see we went from $100 to $103, and then we lost 1% the next month. Then we gained 4%, and so what you see is asset 1, and here's price of asset 1. Here's the return of asset 2. Now I just randomly chose to make these random percentages of the return of 1. Doesn't matter, I can just copy these as numbers. Now price of asset 2 starts at $90. It made 6% or 0.6%, then made 0.3, lost 0.8, lost 0.4%, and ended up at $88. Now I have a portfolio which consists of a certain percentage of asset 1 and a certain percentage of asset 2. It's obvious that along the way, this price should be somewhere between these two. So I basically took, now let's just change this number to like 0%, for example. So if we see 0% held in asset 1, that means 100% is held in asset 2. And if you look at the prices here, the prices match asset 2. If I hold this at 100% of asset 1, then you see the prices match here, they match here. And the portfolio return matches this. But you also see something down here. Here's your average, which in fact was the expected return. And you do find that I listed the standard deviation right across here. So this is the average of this. This is the standard deviation of this series. Same thing here. This is the average of all these. And this likewise is the average of all these. This is the standard deviation of this series. And likewise here. So we can adjust this to anything we want. 11%, but just somewhere in the middle. So you notice the average, basically this average will end up varying between this number and that number. Meaning I can go from here and I can get the lowest number here. I can move to higher percent. And what you notice is I'm bounded. My return is bounded by these two numbers. I can just incrementally go through. If you want to see that, you can look over here. This is a table that I've built in which this is the percent of asset 1. And if you see that you have 0% of asset 1, then this should be the same as this. And if you stare at it from it, you'll notice it is. And if I'm all the way over to 100% of asset 1, this should look just like asset 1, which is right here. And in fact, it does. So in between here is where my portfolio exists. Well, I guess technically all of this is a portfolio, but if you're holding a 0% or 100%, you don't traditionally think of that as being a portfolio anymore. So here we are. This is the bounds. So look at the bounds here. I go from this number to this number, and in between there I see that I started, and I was bounded by those two. Look at this though. You would think ordinarily I'll be bounded also by this. In other words, my minimum will be this, and my maximum will be that. But lo and behold, stare at this and pay close attention. I went from 0.97, I went down 0.8. Wait a minute. I'm not bounded by those two numbers. Standard deviation can actually move below these two numbers, and it moves a little further down, and then starts climbing back. Even though it's climbing back at 30%, I'm still not there. Now at 40%, I am. So you see your risk can drop below and is not bounded by the two assets themselves. So as I created this table, and you play with it a little bit, and I should let's draw this plot up for a moment to play with it. And this plot is directly tied to the assets here. So in other words, if I put 50, you'll see the green line, which is the portfolio, moves up between the two. I can move it to 99, or let's say 95. And you can see the green line of the portfolio pushes up against asset 1, which is 95% in asset 1. I can move it down, and now it's in 10% asset 1, which means, and that's this line, which means the other 90% is held in asset 2. So this plot is associated with this return over time. So you can just watch, you can play around and watch the plot move around by doing this, and you can play that whatever you want to do. So let's go ahead and move that back out of the way. And let's stare at this other plot. What is this plot of? You can play with this plot and see what it is by right-clicking it. But I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say the blue line itself is the series that goes across here. So if you want to see this, the standard deviation is along this axis here. The x-axis is the standard deviation. You see the first one, 0.97, that's the green dot, or the portfolio, which is holding only asset 2. Then I move up to 0.83. Wait a minute, I move up, I move down. So this point is right here. This point is the second point. I move up in my return slightly above. This is the return. This is the standard deviation. So if you want to think about it, this is the x-axis. This is the y-axis here. So this will not be on the plot, so it will be on the spreadsheet that's here. So the next one exists at 0.189% return, which is slightly less down here to stop right here, and a 0.817% risk. So the risk at this point is less than the risk of the green, or asset 2. So we can get reduced risk by actually holding a portfolio. And we'll show this in more detail soon. So with that, play around with this. The spreadsheet is there. Take a look at it, study it, and try your best to understand it. This, in fact, is the plot that we saw on the Wikipedia site. This is the efficient frontier. Here's two assets. Now we're going to go on to the apps that we've written to help us get through this course, and we've used these for subscription services as well. So in this short video, the objectives are pretty simple. They're first, to observe for a 2 security how a portfolio responds to the returns of each asset, the volatility of each asset, and the correlations between those two assets. So we'll do that using an application we've developed in-house. And so let's get started. All right, so we're here at our website, ZA, and two numbers. The numbers are associated with the student number that you have for this class. You should have received an email. We have a number of applications here. Now, we've removed access to some of them, so you can see there's 3 and 5 and 9. Just because this course is a little bit abridged here, we want to get through this as quick as possible. Let's start with this one, which is not crucial, but it allows you to view all the apps that are running. So, for example, I have 2 other apps that are running. I can basically kickstart the server. If you reload it too quick, you're going to see this because the server is restarting, and there we go. The server is back. So let's go to our 2 security site. Now, what you'll realize is I'll jump over to the process manager, and you'll see all of a sudden another application starts. So here, in fact, we're looking at modern portfolio theory with 2 securities. Now, this is exactly the plot that you saw on the Wikipedia site, but it's a live action version of it. Here's what I mean. You can basically go through and change any of these values. Let's say instead of 5%, we would like it to be maybe 3.3%. So at this point, you can see it has a risk of 9, and it has a return of 3.3. What is the risk? Well, that's the same thing as the volatility. So look at the 9 here. There's your 9. Let's go ahead and do this. We moved it to the right. So you can see here's the efficient frontier, and here's a tangent point. Now, one of the things we do here, when we display, there is a tangent point, but sometimes some people compute the point where there is no longer a tangent point, and they basically don't give you the maximum. Here's what I mean. So let's take this from 15, and let's move it back. Now, this point is truly no longer tangent, but this point is still one of the securities, and is still a portfolio to invest in. So all of these are investment possibilities. Many people in their computations will simply not plot this line anymore, saying that there's no longer tangent, so therefore, but we look at it like you're an advisor, you need to make a choice. This is basically the point that is the best on the diagram as far as an investment opportunity. So we use that as a mindset. The key is, here's what's interesting. So if you start looking at the correlation between these assets, if they are correlated, notice what happens. You get a straight line between them. The risk is basically an algebraic expression between the two. Why? Because the row in that spreadsheet that we have, not the spreadsheet, but this correlation at that point is 1. If you carry out the equations, you're going to find that this is a linear sum between those two. So it becomes a straight line. But what happens when we go in the other direction? We start to get a bow in the efficient frontier, and we continue to get a bow, and the bow becomes more prevalent, and exceedingly more prevalent, until suddenly you hit a 0 risk. Yes, in fact, you can get a 0 risk by having 2 assets that are exactly negatively correlated. Unfortunately, in reality, what this looks more like is something like this. And let's just go ahead and make it look like what you would see in reality. And you can find this out there, and this is what it will look like. It will look like a situation where the volatilities are the same. Okay, the reason it's not working is because there is a computational issue here when you do that. So you'll get this. You'll get a return and risk of 0, meaning, now these are for what are basically ETFs that you can file like this, but you can get this. So play around with this app. It will give you an idea of what you can expect to see here. There are times that you can create issues here, but most times this is what you see. What is often called the Markowitz bullet. Some people call it that. This is a tangent portfolio. It was basically constructed or contrived by Bill Sharpe. Now the tangent portfolio is where this line tangents the efficient frontier. So all available portfolios exist on this line. But what happens if you have 3 securities? So that'll be the next video. Okay, in this short video, we're going to include the risk-free asset in the portfolio dynamics. And we're going to see how this risk-free asset impacts the portfolio choices. So with that, let's go ahead. All right, we're going to go in and take a look at the 2 security monitor portfolio. We're going to start our process monitor. And you'll notice that now we have 2 processes running, and here we go. So what we want to address in this video is what is this line? And in order to do that, what we're going to do is get a little bit, change the couple of parameters so that I can see things a little bit better. And then I'm going to zoom in here. So I'm looking at this, and the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to zoom in right here, and I'm going to snapshot this, and I'm going to take a look at some of the points that are important on this diagram. Now, I do apologize for shifting the view over a little bit, but in the sense that the importance here, I need to zoom in. So here's an investor who has, I don't remember how I listed them, but 2 assets. And the first thing we know is that all of the available portfolios sit right here on this line somewhere. So with that, there are 2 interesting points. The first one is this one. And so if an investor basically says, I want a certain percent of 1 and a certain percent of 2, they can go together. If they select the correct percentage, they can get the minimum risk for that particular portfolio of 2 assets. Now, I contend there's another one over here. Now, I'm going to do this again, but the other one is basically the risk-free rate, which is now, you can see it's over here somewhere. So I'm going to redo this in a minute so I can do a better job of scaling the drawing. So let's argue for a minute that another investor comes in. So this is investor A. You have investor B, which he says, I like a percent of 1 and a percent of 2, such that I end up here. And so he ends up here. Now, first glance, you can say, okay, he's going to get a little better return, but he's also going to experience a greater risk than this person being right here. So now, let's say this investor B decides, hey, wait a minute, I think I'm going to hold a certain percent of my portfolio in this new asset here, and I'm going to purchase the risk-free rate down here. So what he will start doing is moving down this line. As he invests more and more in the risk-free rate, he moves down this line. He can actually move to a new special point right here, in which investor B, I'll call him B prime, actually gets the same return as A, but with this much less risk. So this line is basically an investment line, a line in which you can lie on, and you can invest in a point here and start moving down the curve, moving down this line towards the risk-free rate, and stop anywhere you want. You can basically move all the way down to the risk-free interest rate. Now let's go back to the application, and I'm going to do another copy in a moment. But for now, let's just go back to the application and play with a few things there. Okay, now we're back. Now, I do apologize about shifting the drawing around, but let's say that risk-free rate happens to be 2%. Now again, you can use your left and right arrows to move very finely. Okay, exactly 2%. So you can see your 2% right here. You can see, what you can see is, let's take a look at that really closely there, and what you're seeing is something interesting. So what is it that you see actually? Let's hover over this first point, and what you see is the term 0 right here, and 0 right here. Sorry for the drawing there. And we'll move to the second point. And what we see here, we see something even more interesting. We see the weights are in fact 8.2 and then 1.7. Let's add those together. If we do add those together, what we find out is the sum total here is 10%. Let's move on up the curve. And what we find is 16.511 and 3.489. Add those together, and you get 20%. You get 30%, 40%, 50%, then you get 60%, then you get 70%, then you get 80%, 90%, and 100% right there where it turns green. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is something pretty simple. It means that as you go along this line, we got 0 here, 10, 20, 30, 40. So let's just pick the 40. So what you ended up with 40% of funds that were invested right here, and you had 60% in which you purchased the risk-free rate treasury, so to speak. So you can move closer to this by purchasing more treasury. You can move closer to this point by purchasing a higher percentage of assets on that Sharpe point. Okay, just like what we were talking about before, if an investor ends up here and another investor ends up here, which one is better off? Now, at first glance, this might appear to be the better investment with respect to the lower risk. However, that might not always be the case. Right? This one would appear to be better as far as return goes. So this investor has a particular advantage, and that is, let's assume for a moment that, and we will take these points off the drawing and move to about right here, and what we'll realize here is something very interesting. The investor that was here had this amount of risk, and that investor also had that return. Now, the one that decided to put their portfolio exactly on what is called the Sharpe point, ordering a percent of asset 1 and then asset 2, can do something interesting. They can move down this line to say that point. And what they can do is invest 33% in asset 1 and 6%, or roughly 7%, in asset 2. Now, if you add 33 and you add 6.9%, you're not going to get 100%. The reason being is because as you move down this line, you're investing this percentage in these 2, thereby placing you on that point, and then picking up the 2% and investing in that. And this go together to put you at that point. So now this other investor, he has picked up a lower risk, and he's picked up the same return. So this point becomes very important from that aspect. Now, from that perspective, one could argue that this is no longer 2 securities. It in fact is 3. It is in fact the security right here, the security that sits up here, and the security that sits down here. So can we actually see this with a 3-security modern portfolio theory? And the answer to that question is yes, we can. And let's take a few moments to play around with this and do that. So in order to do that, we're going to drop out of this. We're going to go back to the 3-security random. We're going to launch it. What we're going to try to do is we're going to try to match as best we can these particular values. We're going to go in, we're going to take the return. We're going to go back here and try our best. We're not going to be exact, but here's what we're going to do. And so be patient as I go through this. I'm going to say security 1 is 9 and 3.1. 9 and 3.10. Left mouse arrow got me there. Then the return of security 3, which just so happens to be, we're going to call this one security 3. It's going to be 2%. Let's see if I can get it back to 2. So I got it to 2. So here's our 2%. I'm sorry, here's our 2% for security 3. We got this one and we got that one. So we got our returns. Let's go for our volatilities now. If we go back to this 2 security, we go to the volatilities, I'm going to see 15 and 9. Ooh, 15 and 9. Very good. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what is the volatility of this point. Actually, the volatility there is 0. However, there is a numerical problem here. I can draw it back, and numerically it will work okay for a while until I get too far back there. Let me just try to see how far I can get before it blows up. I might be able to get right to 0.1, at the point, or 0.2, left arrow 0.1, and explode. So it won't do that, but I can get it right here. And so here's what I see. I see portfolio 1, security 1 and 2, but I need to do something else here. I need to look at the correlation between 1 and 2, and right here I got 0.14. So let me go back between 1 and 2. So now I've got the volatility in return. Let's try to get it at 0.14. Close. Now I'm going to use the left. There we go. Now, this is a randomly produced set of points. It uses a certain distribution that maintains a weighting such that all the sum of the weights in the portfolio are equal to 1. Now let me add quite a number of extra points here. And what you'll see is you'll see all the possible portfolios that you can have. They no longer sit only on this line or this curve here. They actually come off that curve. Now, if you want to see the interactions between everything, slide that back to a small value, and you're going to see the interactions that you would normally see on the other plot. In other words, here's your arc here. That is the portfolio that would exist having security 1 and 2 only. And that's the same thing you see here. If you go along this point, you'll look and see security 3 always has a 0%. So this is the curve that exists between security 1 and security 2. Now, security 3 sits over here. Now, we said before that if two securities have a correlation coefficient of 1, they move together. If one moves up one day, the other one does too. If one moves down, the other one does too. They move in lockstep. They don't have to move the exact same percentage, but they have to move together. If you do that, we will compare what happens with security 1 and 2, and watch what happens to this line, or these group of points, as I move it. Now over here, what you're going to notice is I don't go all the way to 1 because this has to create through numerics. It goes numerically, it works differently. So I got to 0.95. So what you see is almost a straight line between security 2 and security 1. So you see a straight line almost, and you see it becomes, you have to let it compute. It starts becoming more arc-like as the correlation between these values start coming down. Now notice what happens as I start going deep into the negative territory. The first thing you notice, give it a minute, is this arc crosses over the line that connects security 3 with security 1. So now let's go look at this particular scenario in which now we're going to fill in and look at all the, okay, so what you're seeing here is the outline with a few exceptions, a few points in there. This is a randomly produced set of points. So there are some outliers, but this, with the random distribution point of 0.01 here, you're looking at the edges, the connections between any of these assets. You see a straight line, an arc. Now let's do a fill in. I'll move this to the right. And the first thing you see is that. Now let's reduce it down to the point where I can get a good picture, and we'll talk about the points here. So please be patient with me as I draw these points down. And that's pretty good looking there. So I'm going to attempt to do this and to show us the significance of the Sharpie point. Here is the significance. Let's make sure I have the right annotation tool. Here's the risk-free rate. If I go up this line, I get a maximum up here where I start tangenting. It's a tangent. That's a weird way I shouldn't have said that. It is a tangent point to this curve, which is security 1 and 2. I may have those listed backwards. But my point is, that is the significance here. That is why that tangent point is so important, is because there exists a whole bunch of portfolios no one really ever talks about. And that is all these. They talk about this line, the tangents, and this curve. And they so very often don't really address the fact that, you know what, this line can originate here, and it can go to right there, or it can go to right here. Turns out, the best place to go is to the Sharpie. Why? Well, let's answer that question. All these portfolios that you see are possible, plus the ones that are not even shown. So if some investor comes in and invests his portfolio, okay, anyway, right here, and he wants 4%. He wants a 4% return, in other words. You can exist anywhere. You can exist here, anywhere along this line. It makes common sense to be at the place that you have the lowest risk. You want the lowest risk. So, in fact, that's the definition of the efficient frontier. So, if you're going to include a risk-free asset in your portfolio, then your efficient frontier is actually here. Not your efficient frontier. Anywhere along that line, or curve, sorry. We a line here and a curve up here. The slope of this line, let me see if I can draw it. It's the Sharpie number. That would be, depending on how you do it, the rise over the run. Return, risk. So, that slope is the famous Sharpie number. I have seen this point here listed as the tangent point and as the Sharpie point. But now you see the significance of it. This significance doesn't go away when you add other assets. And we'll do that soon. But you can have as many assets as you want. You will have the same looking curve. You'll tangent to it. And we'll see this as we go further. Okay, I'd like to bring up something else pretty important here. And that's this. We can bring up either on this drawing or the other. It doesn't really matter. But here's the point. Okay, if you're purchasing a portfolio for a client and you decide to participate in the risk-free interest rate, that's the point that you'll purchase your bonds at. And we listed this 2% was up here. However, when you purchase that, you know exactly what that return is going to be. When you purchase these two, you can say, I can make a good guess at what this is going to be, but these two, you don't really know. So that's a consideration to take into account when you're producing a portfolio and you're deciding whether or not to include this risk-free interest rate actively instead of just as a reference point. But all of these points are predicted or modeled out here. These points being this one and this one. This is exact. This is exact what you purchase it at. This is known. And so you have two entities, the known and the unknown. And so that's something to consider when you're putting together a portfolio. Now, the other thing is you definitely want more than two. So you might want 50 or even more if you're creating your client's portfolio. Okay, with that, we're going to draw this video to a close. We'll see you there. Okay, in this video, we're going to investigate 3 security portfolios. And we're going to look at the Sharpie point significance and the Sharpie number significances. So let's get started. Okay, so we might have 3 securities. So as you can see, I have 2 applications for the 3 securities. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the process monitor. I'm going to restart the application completely. And I'm basically going to, now if you do this, just redo it. It shows up. You're giving the server a chance to reboot. I'm going to hit the random and the efficient or the modern portfolio theory at the same time. And what you're going to see, okay, here's what you're seeing here. You're seeing 2 portfolios that are exactly the same. Here you're starting to see security 1, security 3, and security 2. You will see the correlations. Now you have a correlation between 3 and 1, a correlation between 3 and 2, and a correlation between 2 and 1. This is what you're seeing here. So if you want to see the effect of this, you can move it. And what you'll see is there became a larger bow in here. If you want to see more points, you just go out and add more points, and you'll start to see a cloud. These are a cloud of points. And if you really want to see individual lines, you'll start to see something interesting here. And I would suggest playing around with this. This is just a random distribution of points with certain constraints. The constraints are produced here. You're clustering more to the individual 2 assets here. And so you're beginning to see the curves that we saw. Whoops. You're beginning to see the curves that we saw on the 2 asset. But in reality, there are many more choices here. Now, you have all of this encompasses all the possible portfolio choices to the point where you can have 10,000 of them. You need this big cloud. Looks kind of like a sail here. Now, you want to produce a modern portfolio theory there. You want to produce a computation using those 3 sets of equations we came up with a couple slides ago. Well, we've made it these apps so that they can connect together. So we have these individual terms that we can adjust, or you can load from app 2. So this is application 2. And any change I made, so what you see is 0.4, 0.5, and 0.31. Let's go look at the correlations. Right now I see this. If I load app 2 now, you see immediately it changes to 0.31. So it essentially goes over to this other application and loads the data. Now it is calculating the efficient frontier using multiple methods. And we're all about validation here. So we have programmed 4 different approaches, actually, no, really 3 different approaches and 4 actual computation engines in which we compute the efficient frontier given all of this information. And we have done these such that we constantly validate to make sure everything is in sync. That's because we are an advisory firm, so we understand that it's very important that things are done correctly. So you can see these points kind of coalesce. And the reason that you have these is that you just simply you're drawing a straight line between points. If you add more points, they would all coalesce together. Here's one computational method. Here's another computational method. This is some information about the condition number of the matrix, the compute time, and the minimum eigenvalue of the matrix. Just computational information. The key to get out of this is that I can see there's an actual cloud of points that no longer confines the portfolio because now I have 3 assets. I can have multiple combinations. If you look at any one point, here's a point that I'm just hovering over. 15.7% is invested in asset 1, 11.5 is invested in asset 2, and 72.8 is invested in asset 3. It gives me a risk of 9.9% and return 6.4%. So you can start to see different portfolios. Now, let's get really close to the point where we touch here. Okay, look at this one. 21% in asset 1, none in asset 2, and 79% in asset 3. So as I track this, you're going to see nothing in asset 2. Well, that's because here's asset 2, and this is the curve. And if you want to see that clearer, you just see that. And there's the individual curves. But here's the point. Look at this one point out here. There's a fill-in out here, in which the efficient frontier along in here consists of the participation of all 3 assets. You should be able to, if I can zoom in here, see that as well here. We have the participation of all 3 assets along this point. We make it to the point here where we do not have the participation of all 3 assets. The key here now is this, and this is what you see and hear a lot about. If I can choose to have a portfolio, and say, for example, this point, and I want to return 6.5%, it makes sense to me to start moving back this direction until I get the lowest risk for my 6.5%. And given the fact, here, I'll just zoom in here. So if I want my 6.5%, probably that's about the best I'm going to do. I get a risk of 8.9, return of 6.5. To get that, I will need a portfolio with 32.8% in asset 1, with 18.7% in asset 2, and with I'm sorry, I said that wrong. 32.8% asset 1, 48.5 asset 2, 18.7 asset 3. The key is, if I want a particular return, I really want to be on this efficient frontier. Now, there comes a point where a lot of people do not draw the lower part of this curve. We do because we want to see the entire shape. But would you want a portfolio down here? No, because if I were willing to pick up, say, a risk of this value, then why would I want to do that? I only pick up 5.1% when I can move vertical until I hit this number line and I have the same risk and get a higher return. So in fact, anything beyond this minimum point, which is right here, this is the minimum portfolio, the minimum risk portfolio that exists in these 3 assets is right here. Now, that is a crucial point because from that point up this efficient frontier, this direction, this is where your investment opportunities exist. Now, if you pay attention to what a lot of people present, they present this. Now, let's see if I can do this. They present only that part of the curve, the minimum risk portfolio, all the way up to the top. And then they search for their tangent point, which if I can, I'm not sure I can do a good job of getting that tangent point. I believe this is it right here. So that's a special point because given that, in this case, I don't have any interest rate. So let's say, okay, these are generally look to me to be annualized. Let's say the going interest rate was 2%. One of the things you'll find out is when you're playing this app, you can select that and you can use the arrow keys to move point at a time. If I can get up here somewhere, I can find the blue point that is the starting point. If I move off that and move down here, for example, you'll see something interesting. You will see, and let's just move it down to this. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, you see the weights here. And let's take a look at that. I'm going to calculate these weights. I'm going to calculate them using my, actually, what I'm going to do, I don't think I can copy them. I'm going to have to see them off the screen. So 23.387 plus 18.398 plus 8.215 becomes 50%. So where's the other 50%? So what you're doing here is you're investing 50% in the portfolio here and 50% in your risk-free rate. Therefore, you're buying a bond. So you're buying a bond at 2% and you're investing in your portfolio up here. And what that gives you is a point that you can invest along this line. Many people ignore that fact, and consequently, they ignore the fact they will invest right here. Let me do a better job. They will invest their portfolio right here. When in fact, they can get a lower risk and the same return by moving to the left until, bang, you participate in a portfolio that exists on the Sharpie point, which is up here. So you take the Sharpie point, you invest in it, use half your money or whatever. I don't know what whatever the percentage would be. And then you come back, say the minimum, let's say for example, the minimum point, which it doesn't, but let's say it lined up with right here. So your weights in your portfolio would be this. The remainder of your money you would use instead of leaving it as cash, you would take it and buy the treasury. And so many people do not pay close attention to the significance of this line in that it is actually an investment opportunity. It is not just the identification of a point on the diagram. There are investment opportunities that exist along this whole line until you get here. And here you get no risk, no values are invested in the assets at all, and you get 2%. Now if you move up and say, I want 10% of my money to go into the Sharpie point that exists on the efficient frontier, or maybe I want 20% and 80%. 80% in bonds, 20%. Here is another very, very, very important point. When you go to purchase this, you can purchase a note, and on that note is written the percent. It is, if the bond is low risk, like a government bond, that's what you're going to get. Up here, these 3 assets are predicted, and this is what you would get in the future if they happen to be close to your prediction. Now, this could be viewed as using past data, in which this is what you should have done, okay? But that is either here or there. But the key is, this is known. These values are approximated. So if things go right over here a little bit, move down, you still are being picked up by your 2%. So play around with these apps. You can get an idea of what's going on. You can play with correlations. Now, you can do things that are just not right. For example, this. Okay, why did it cause an error? Well, it's very simple. Okay, let's think of it as a triangle in which asset 1 and 2 are correlated at, let's just say we're going to put it here. It's going to show a problem. But sometimes I can get away with it. So here you've got a situation where, take a look here. Here is asset 1 and 2. Okay, let me make sure I can see. Okay, there's 2 and 1. But asset 2 and 3, here's 2 and 3. You see the straight line. Here. You see the straight line between those two. It is possible if the correlation between, think about this, 2 and 3, this one and this one are correlated, straight line. I would venture to say if these two are correlated, then the correlation coefficient between this one and that one should match the correlation between this one and that one. Otherwise, you have some numerically weird data. And consequently, I still can move. And then I'm going to get a situation where computationally, that's not even a physical problem that can exist. So these are numbers, not reality. And reality, it will show you that you can get some form of reality like that. And you can play around with this and do something really strange. And you can produce it is true, you can produce this. And let's see if we can, let's play with this. I'm going to move security 2 up to like 7. Security 2, move up to like 7. So get this, okay, 3 highly correlated assets. And this is the universe of possible portfolios that can exist. Let's move over to our modern portfolio theory and load those. And what we're going to do is, this is where it was. We're going to load. And it says, ooh, it does not like that. It does not calculate these things. So the question is, can I move this off a little bit? These are situations that don't occur. You'll never see this occurring. But it is entertainment. And suddenly we get ourselves to the point where we can't see this. So you see, he's drawing this line down to here, and then turning around and drawing back to here. And so, in fact, it's weird and strange, but yeah, this is your efficient frontier. It's a straight line. Now, in reality, you can get, really, the more assets you add, you can get some very strange shaped efficient frontiers. You see them as marked with bullets, but they can be very, very strange. So with that, play around with the 3 assets, and what we're about to do is move into the realm of reality. So these from the 3, so 5, 9, 11, and 12 are real assets, and we're going to move into the real realm now. Okay, welcome to this video. In this video, the objectives are to investigate real world portfolios. This is from data that's real. The data is generated in the spring of 2025. To load portfolio definitions from cloud storage that we're going to go through. To observe and learn the internal structure of a portfolio. We're also going to observe the impacts of the holding constraints. And we're going to use those holding constraints to obtain the equally weighted portfolio that we're going to learn to use later on in this course. With that, let's get started. Okay, we're entering the real world. We're going to investigate some real world portfolios. We're going to load them through our cloud storage. So the way this works is you go in and you go to your files, you go to portfolio, and you can see there's several portfolios set up here. We're going to start having it, and we'll start with this one. So all you do is list equities. At this point, you don't need this, but later you'll need to put a lower and upper bound on each of those equities listed exactly as this file is. And so let's go to the applications. You can load the information from the web browser at the ZNC, the number, and or you can go and listen, or work directly if you connect your machine to the browser like we showed in the video before. So now let's go to the application, CA, the two numbers, and visit.com. We'll go to this, and we'll start here. Looking at the process monitor, there's one process running, that is this process. We're going to go down to MPT, or my portfolio theory, the browser portfolios, one pattern. And the first thing you see is the A1 portfolio it defaults to, but here's all the portfolios that are listed in that directory. We'll start with A1. What is interesting, we have created this shotgun pattern. We'll start here. So the patterns are a series of random points that are placed on the diagram, and similar to the application we did before, we produce the points and then we place them on the plot. What you see is a pretty obvious connection between any two of the assets. You can see this asset is connected through this, you can see the arc. So this is like a whole series or group of 2 asset problems that are all going together. You'll see other points that are not laying on there, and you can add those by altering these parameters and produce a set of points there and place those on the diagram as well. You'll fill in a little bit, and you can start to see the outlook of the entire efficient frontier. So this is all or a subset of all available portfolios that exist with these assets. If we want to know the efficient frontier, we compute it, and it's relatively fast, and then we can place it on the plot. And it's obvious what you see. You see it covers the outside or the leftmost region of the entire enclosed space here. And so this is what we expect. We also realize from this plot, it's pretty apparent we should have included more points along the efficient frontier. We move from here to here, but there's quite a bit of an arc that we go through here. And you can see obviously the Sharpie point landed right on the top here. If you look at it, it looks like it's associated with 2 assets, and it's not too surprising because if you back off, you see one of these assets is the ExxonMobil, and the other asset is the one that's all the way back here, and it is the NVIDIA. So when you see that and you click the efficient frontier, you see ExxonMobil, NVIDIA. Why do you see that? Because actually, if you look at it, the connection between this asset and this one begins right around here on the efficient frontier. All these points along the efficient frontier are connected to only those 2 assets. This is something you would not see if you didn't generate the internal structure using the random point generation. So I encourage you to play with this application. I will tell you that the allocation date, if you moved it too far forward into the future and try to do it, it will default back to the last day it had to appear, which is 04/25/2025. So it won't change that date. But if I go to that and look at now, it's 03/12, which matches this, 04/16, and then move here, 04/25. Even though it's like the 30, it's 04/25. The data that exists on this education system is frozen at that time. It is real data, but it's frozen at that time, so that everyone can have the same data. It will be frozen throughout the entirety of this course, offering this course. You have the interest rate, which this is beneficial if you wish to increase the interest rate, not the risk-free rate. You can see this in computing the efficient front, and you can see the interest rate picked up here. This interest rate is annualized. This return is, in fact, on a daily basis. So if you want to switch them, you divide the annualized by 252. If you want to move this to annualized, you multiply this by 252. The risk is not annualized either. It's on a daily basis. Holding constraints 0 and 100. Interest rate, we talked about that. The historical model, we won't talk about that right now, but this is the model we use as a alternate historical model. So I would encourage you to play with this application, get the most you can out of it. I will tell you real quick, if we load in one of these, and we wish to create the shotgun pattern here, we're going to get this message. We're limited to 10 or less. The number of assets must be 10 or less to generate the points. Now, we did add one that was exactly 10, and it says 10 on it. And here are the points here. We can generate the points there moderately fast. And so this shows a fairly large cloud, but that's because we did not place them here. We're going to increase the opaqueness of those points. And we created quite a mess here, so what I'm going to do is erase that and try to get. Okay, now we see this in a little better mode here, and we can see the internal structure that's connected to all of these assets. So how do you change or take your own portfolio? You can just take one of these files and copy it. Change these things. For example, if I type in GOOGL, that's another version of Google, we'll save that. That will be saved as cap10 now. And what I'll do is I'll just go in and restart the whole server. And if I reload, that's fine. The server's coming up. Give it a second more. We've got our file. We're going to load cap10 again. We're going to compute first our efficient frontier. We're going to place it on the diagram. We're going to just pick the Sharpie point, look at our holdings. And you'll see we have GOG and GOGL, which we didn't have before. But here's what's interesting, why that goes in here. You'll see mine in a second. Let's go to the pattern. We're going to look and create maybe 400 spots. Then we're going to plot it. And we see the makeup of how the internal structure of the portfolio is. And if we zoom in right here, we see GOG. And we should be able to see, although I'll just click it because I can't see GOGLE. So what we see is a straight line connected between these, but arcs connected between these 2. Now if you want to see a little bit more, this is how you can experiment and play around with this. Notice how both of these are interestingly connected to this apple. So the arc comes back much like this, and this one comes back pretty much like this. Looks like these are 2 parallel curves, so to speak, not exactly, but you know what I mean. And so you see a straight line between those. You can pick another date and see if you see the same thing. Let's pick another allocation date. We'll just move back anywhere, just at a random time. Do the same thing. And place the points on the plot. It's possible that I don't think those are it. Yeah, I was wrong. That isn't these 2. So if you look right here, this is GOG, this is Google. You can almost see a straight line between them, indicating that they are highly correlated. If they were not correlated, the arc would push out to the left. And so you can kind of see how these assets are connected to each other by looking at the overall form of the internal structure this way. You can see obviously the connection between this asset and this asset right here. I don't know what these are, but I'll click there. It looks like Apple connected with Walmart has pushed it fairly significantly left to here. So, and you can see this push up basically to the left has created or drawn quite a number of points here. You can also see that the uncorrelated nature of the ones down here drew the efficient frontier down to the left as well. So there's a lot you can see visually. There's not a lot you can quantify, but as you start seeing this, you start saying, oh, I can't understand why the efficient frontier when I get the plot looks so strange. And if I place it on the plot, it would produce something you would expect, which is the leftmost region of every single portfolio in existence that you can have. Now, the next thing is how do holding constraints change the whole equation? Well, let's play with them. We have 10 assets here. Let's draw. First of all, let's look up here. It looks to me like if I get in the Sharpie number and I want to exist there, I click that and I see the holdings are 61% in Walmart. That is way too high for my comfort, so I'm going to draw it to 30%. It's obvious that up here the Sharpie number is going to be pulled back to the right because that is not really truly diversified to have that much in one asset and to only have 3 assets. The definition of diversification might be one thing, and there's a lot of discussion about how modern portfolio theory guarantees high level of diversification, but only under certain constraints. So let's constrain it and let's compute it, and you'll see how the efficient frontier changes. Now we'll place it on the diagram, and what you see is something interesting. It draws to the right and drops off. So you see all the portfolios that are on the efficient frontier that fit under this holding constraint draws everything to the right. If you look at the Sharpie for the constrained portfolio, you're seeing, I don't believe I touched the right one. Let's see. Okay. You see 30.8 is what we specified, 30.8, so you still only have 4. So maybe that's not even enough. Yeah, so let's draw down to 16%. I can use the left arrows to move in a finer fashion there. 16%. I'll do a compute. Place it on the diagram. Look at the diagram. I probably should have done that in reverse. And suddenly you see a significant reduction in moving to the right. Now, this is what happens inside here. Now we're getting obscured. Our view is kind of obscured by the internal structure of this portfolio, or internal structure of this all available portfolios. But if you go and look at it, you will find that all the points on the efficient frontier meet the restriction of 16%. And suddenly you're getting participation from almost everybody. Okay, so here's the problem. You've got to be really good about, okay, so this was picked up. Here, we're going to this was trace number 8, so I'm looking for trace 9. This is trace 1, 9. That will be on the efficient frontier, 16. So trace 9 is this one. You want to see trace 9? There we go. There we go. So here's another point that's interesting to bring up. See how well I can get here. Now, this is obviously trace 9. It obviously meets the restrictions that I've placed on it. These random points have no restrictions. They're just a random distribution of possible weights that make up a portfolio. So if I click near to this, you expect the holding constraints to be the same or similar, but they're not. In fact, you can find one to the right or the left that do not meet the constraints. So in fact, you can have one portfolio right here that meets the constraint. You can actually have another portfolio that has the same risk in return that does not meet the constraint. So that's the whole purpose behind doing modern portfolio theory. You're looking for the point for a given risk. Let me state this by zooming out. For a given risk, we'll say 0.01. You want to go as high as you can to get the most return. So when you do, under these constraints, you get this curve right here. If you do not constrain it, you'll move all the way up to here. The other thing the efficient frontier does for a given return, you move your risk as low as possible until you hit the efficient frontier. That is the point at which you can no longer move to the left. Now, this one has a higher constraint than needs to. So constraining the portfolio gives you diversification, but you sometimes give up some return, and you actually can often see a greater risk numerically. Now, one final thing I want to talk about is what happens if you have the fact that you would like to draw the upper bound below a certain point. And we replace this on the plot, and when you place it on the plot, there is no longer an efficient frontier. There is one single point in which all the efficient frontier sits on that point. Why is that point special? We'll click it and you'll find out why. Everything is at 10%. We could not meet the constraint of 8.3% because I cannot get anything below 10%. So this, in fact, is a way of getting an equally weighted portfolio. So I can't stress this enough because we're going to use this concept in the future. We're going to compare equally weighted portfolios through time with modern portfolio theory under a certain model. And we're going to compare these two results. So with that, I think we've covered everything. Now, what I want you to do is, this is up to you. You'll have to do this, but then play with this. Make your own portfolio. Play with it. Change the dates. Do what you want to. We have a lot of assets in our data bank. You can play with what you want. We've constructed this course so you have the opportunity to play with this application and not just look at it as we go by. So with that, we're done. And I want to thank you for your time. We'll go to the next application. So it's worth noting at this point that we obtained an equally weighted portfolio at specific intervals by using modern portfolio theory. But we did so by enforcing a maximum or upper bound that forced the portfolio into an equally weighted configuration at each interval. In this case was a month. Now we go back to the backtesting. And what I'm going to do is instead of the equally weighted portfolio, I'm going to pick up a 12p. I'll start with a 25p. What is this 25p? Here's what it is. Click. I can click the holdings. Maybe I do not. Okay, 25p means 25%. So this means 25%. So you can see 25% here. All the way down as far as you go, it's going to be 25% maximum holding for everybody. So I'm not holding anybody past 25%. So let's go through each of the items. We have a clip date, same clip date. Okay, we're still confined to that. Reallocation period month. Asset balance, we're still confined to the 4-month turnover. Now, this one is set at 18%. Okay, so here's the key, is now I'm going to get a change, a more rapid change from month to month. Before, I was basically reallocating back to equally weighted. Now it's not going to be equally weighted. It is possible that my portfolio will direct you to holding a group of assets, and then the next period, I may sell off half of them and order another asset. We don't want that. We want to restrict it to some percentage of turnover. I'm going to, at this point, turnover 18%. That's, this is not optimized. It was just, it was a number. And a big number. Didn't want to pick 100%. 18 seems like an even number. And that's it. That's all you got. So now, we'll go back and start the whole competition over. But this time, doing a different portfolio. This time also, I'm probably going to pause the video, so I'm going to pause it. We'll come back in a second. Okay, we finished. I'm going to the end. Okay, so at this point, it's all good. We're happy to whatever. We're just on this case. When we do that, we will, okay, oops, again, I hit the wrong button. F11, drop back. We're going to move back to here. We don't see anything yet. If we're impatient, we'll do it automatically. If we're just patient. We can go in here and sync it now, and you can see it created the directory and drop the file there. Let's go look at the file. It's loading it. Let's move over to the weights. And suddenly you see something different. Okay? Before you saw the same weight all the way across. Now, you're going to see, okay, in this date, 22%, 22.82, whatever, percent is held in Apple. 25 is held in that. And you can move across here and see how the portfolio changed. Now, the turnover, you can see, you won't see the turnover here. You'll see the turnover here. You won't see it moving in and out of a portfolio rapidly. I mean, in and out of asset rapidly. You'll see it move in and move out. There are a few, we didn't constrain and drop those off. We can do that so that those are rounded to zero, but we didn't. We just left it in there exactly as they were. That's the point right now, is exact comparison to compare whether this is better or worse. So we have that. Now what do we do? So we drop the Excel out completely. You don't want to see it. We're done. So, and we saw in this case, now let's process the small file. Now, the thing is, right now, you will not see it. There are two levels of restart here. We can restart the app completely, or we can restart the server, which restarts all apps. So now we see that we have the equally weighted and we have the 25p. We only have one file in there. So let's load that file. And once we load it, we see there's the information. We're going to come back to this in a moment. We still have the same fees, 1% and 10. We're just going to leave it there now. On this one, for example, the last, let me just get the last entry, is 28.7. It's actually 36.62. So if we go back here, it's not 36.62. But if I want to check the numerics are operating, I can see it's 36.62 now. And 36.62. So in fact, it is correct. But adding your 1% fee, okay, use the arrow keys to, and I'll just, for some reason, I'm stuck on this 1% 10, but your fees would be different. You can move up to 2% down, but this is a flat fee, it's not graduated. So here's the results. Okay, now we have these results, and we're staring at them. Now we can compare them to the benchmark. But this, we are comparing to the benchmark. That is compared to the asset. But we're not comparing apples to apples yet. We're comparing to the benchmark. What we want to do, we want to compare the modern portfolio theory to the naively equally weighted one. So how do we do that? There's really not that hard. We have a thing at the bottom called CCO save. That is for Chief Compliance Officer. Now, what you would generally do for a subscriber, you would save to not the firm's account, but you would save to the CCO's account. The CCO would approve it and then put it on the firm's account. What we're going to do right now is save to the firm account. But this makes it so we need to really address what is the firm's account. We don't have it here, so let's add the account. The same address as before. The problem is going to be is you may be logged in. I believe I'm still logged in here. So I need to log out. Okay, once I'm logged out, we'll continue. We'll try to log back in. I will log in to firm and the password that you were given. Now, it says currently logged in as firm, and then we grant access You can close the browser if you want, but once you do that, you can say choose a different folder. I think I would like it to be on the desktop and to be. Okay, I'll let the firm account, select the folder, sync everything, and go ahead and connect. It's syncing and created this folder. Now, unfortunately, I should have thought about that. This is this one, this is the firm. So what you see is existing account is these. So I'm going to delete all these. And I'm going to look at the file called choices. The file choices are ticker and description. So these are the tickers that I've decided I'd like to compare against. So I would suggest leaving that file completely alone. Now let's go back to our application that we are working in. And that is here. So let's go back to the point. The point being here is we're going to save this to the firm account, and then we're going to compare in the firm's account. And this is just I'm going to click the firm one save. Let's click that one. We're going to save it. And save it to the firm account. If we want to see that, we come back here. If we're patient, it will happen automatically, and there you see it happened. Now let's go back to the other swan, the EQ. We'll load that file. Remove that. Now it's getting confusing here, so I'm going to move the benchmark to that. So I don't accidentally click the wrong file. So I click that one. So get to the firm's account. Now if I'm patient, it'll automatically update to OEX89 EQ and leave underscore 01. I'm running out of patience here, and so I'll just run out. Just go ahead and do it. There it is. So we have those two files in here. How do we compare those two? Well, this is where you go to the WordPress, which is what we offer our subscribers as well. You can go there to the trial site. Basically, when you come into this course or you're a subscriber, you get this, and if you're a subscriber, you get to change this however you want. You can run this, but for the point of this course, we're going to go straight to the applications, and we're going to do portfolio performance comparisons. And because of the size of everything, I'm going to have to slide down a little bit. Okay, so I think I'm going to probably use the full screen here because there's a lot here, and actually even then I'm going to have to move up and down. So right now it's comparing the down to the down. But you can see this is the list of those in that choices, and you get to the very bottom, you see what we were talking about. There's the OEX25, so we'll do the EQ here and compare that EQ with the 25. Now slide down and you can see the comparison here. So to answer the question that we were seeking to answer in this part of the lecture is, does modern portfolio theory outperform a native diversification using the same exact set of assets? And this is pretty obvious that it does. The blue is the modern portfolio theory. The green is the naively diversified portfolio. So it seems obvious at this point that using modern portfolio theory gives you a better result than an equally weighted naive portfolio of the same assets. And we have to remember we're comparing apples to apples here, not apples to oranges. So with that, I would say the answer is yes, it probably is worth using modern portfolio theory. And with that, we will conclude this video and move on to answering a couple of other questions on modern portfolio theory.